Sophie Bellino. Was born in the United States, and I'm lucky I was born in Brooklyn. Yes. Well, I lived in a small community. It's along a strip along the ocean called Canarsie. Then you have Sheepshead Bay and Coney Island. We were the part of Brooklyn that was on Long Island. See, Long Island, Long Island is a strip of land if you haven't been there. It's off the mainland. And Brooklyn and Queens have partially on the mainland and the other part on Long Island. And that's where I lived. And it was a nice city. We had small houses, 1 and 2 family homes. It wasn't too bad until we had an explosion of population as we're having here. So you didn't have any empty lots where you used to play ball, and that sort of thing. Well, I lived in New York most of my life. And then when I married John, he was stationed in Texas. And I didn't know what wonderful people lived west of the Mississippi. So I finally got across the Mississippi and found that all of these people were great. I usually say my husband was blind in one eye, that's how I got him. But I don't think that. Yeah, I married in 41. John went into service in 43. My husband wanted to enlist. He went down to enlist. And he knew he didn't have a good sight in one eye, but they told him that he was legally blind. So he waited. He says, maybe the time will come when they can use me. Finally, they were really short men of all sorts. So they took him in on what a classification called 1B, not a 4F, 1B, because he had many, many functions that he could do. Those were the real heavy years when the war was really going, So they took people as best that they could to do what we could. It was good. The only thing I really felt badly is that my mother and sister were not there. They were at home. But my husband was there, so that's where I belonged. Del Rio, Texas, there's Laughlin Field. It's still active. They had deactivated for a time and then reactivated it. And it was a training command, which was rather dangerous because most of those young men had never flown a plane before. So there were a lot of crashes and a lot of loss of life there. And as I think I mentioned, the B-26 was the training plane. And some of the wives of these men, these GIs, they were working just the same as I at the base. And it was awfully sad when they knew their husband was up there and that plane came down. There was no escape hatch. It was one of the first. It was a medium bomber. Shortly after that, they came up with an A-26, which had an escape hatch. But I don't know why. Maybe for mobility. I don't know. The design of the ship, the plane, was that way. And it was sad because it was just a pilot and navigator. And I guess he did bombardiering as well. So it was a very sad time for a lot of these ladies. I was fortunate. My husband was in stock. He took care of the stock room and various other, whatever, he had to deliver parts. And then because I didn't know what else to do with myself, they hired me in the machine shop. And I learned to run a lathe. And it was fascinating because the parts for the engine were not accessible. So we had to make bolts. And you took a plain piece of steel and you cut the little into it and you created a bolt that they needed to keep that plane flying. And we always had the sign there, keep the plane flying, and loose lips sink ships. We read it constantly and we had to be aware because you didn't know who was listening, who should not have been listening. Many of the ladies did machine work. I just did a small amount of it, but some of these ladies, they really knew those machines. And women's hands were smaller. Their fingers got into places that perhaps the men couldn't. So we did a lot of the fine work. But the important thing was to keep the planes flying and have those men trained. It was just sad when they had to leave the country. That was the purpose, yes it was, to free an able-bodied man. Yes. And my husband, he was blind in one eye, legally blind, he also took care of stockroom, ordered parts for the planes, I think it was a Glen L. Martin engine. And we would order those parts to be sure they were there so that we could keep those planes flying. No good on the ground. Well, I did that, I think, for about a year. And then I went into stock. The stock room. I used to issue in what they called the tool room. The men that worked what they called on the line would come in and borrow tools for the day for that particular job. And I would issue them out and bring them back in again, you know, identify them, and work partially in the parachute building. That was nice because the parachutes were made of pure nylon. And it was fun. It was a good time, and of course a bad time too, you know. War is hell wherever it is. Most of them were nurses. They did nursing. They ran the jeeps. They drove officers to various places. My sister did a short time in the waves with the Navy, and I didn't. I wanted to be with my husband, and I was older. You know, a lot of them were young women fresh out of school. When we moved there, Del Rio was a small town. The main street, you turned your head and you were through. But the women there, they too had children in service. And they were able to do, one woman was with the telephone company, and she volunteered and came work out. A lot of them volunteered at the base. They weren't on salary. I was on salary because my husband was a private, so we kind of needed the money. When he came out, he was a sergeant, so we were in a better spot. But some of those ladies gave of their time, a lot of them through their churches. And I tell you, a man in uniform was welcome everywhere. They opened the doors to you. They were very kind. And it was just, I felt at home. They hired us civilian personnel as a wartime thing. And if you worked a couple of months here, fortunately we stayed at Laughlin Field a good 2 years. And then John was sent out on what they call detached service. So we went to Las Vegas, of all places, and California. And we were mostly in Texas. I think everything in the world was in Texas then. They had so much room for us in Lubbock and San Angelo. I didn't expect to see sidewalks. I thought everywhere I walked, a scorpion or a rattlesnake was going to get me. I never actually saw one until I was visiting. We got friendly with people who lived there. They were wonderful. They took you into their home. They invited you for lunches. I have never seen people so kind. You meet so many wonderful people. Through adversity, people become friendlier and closer together. And gosh, I met the greatest people in the world from anywhere in the United States that I didn't even know existed. When John was on base, my husband was an enlisted man, so he couldn't live off the base. The officers did. But I was practically adopted by these people from Texas, and he would come and have dinner, and then we would go and we would eat in the, or what do they call it, mess hall. And you know, not cooking it myself, I used to say, boy, this is nice food, and they'd say, be quiet, it's terrible. I used to go, when he was in Nevada, we used to go up into the mountains, and we'd have Sunday dinner. Great. Unfortunately, I had a small tumor that had to be removed, and I was in the hospital. And all I heard were whistles, and the train ran right by. We were in Texas, we were at Laughlin Field, and the whistles and the bells and the church bells, people just went wild. It was such a wonderful time, you know. And here I was laying in bed listening to all this, but they came in and told me it was VJJ. That was the second part of the war. The first, the war in Europe, I think we were in Lubbock, Texas at that time. It was a good city, and my husband had what to do with preparing men for shipment to various parts of the world. So that's how we moved around. That's the only time. It was actually only a year that we moved around a bit. But I loved it so much, I didn't want to come home. I was going to stay in Texas. People are good, but I think sometimes we're too busy to take the time to do the things that people in small towns do. But my husband had a family here. He had a brother that he fortunately came out of the war, and so we came home. But coming out to Colorado has been the highlight in my life since. My husband came back, and he learned, he knew bookkeeping, so he thought he would like to change his job. He used to run a warehouse, and he thought, well, he was getting a little older, and he was a very bright young man, so he went to school, and he took typing, and he furthered in accounting, And he was able to get a different job than what he did when he went in. That was to his advantage. It was great. It was great for him at that time, yes. And I know a lot of young men have done that and had a very bright future through it, because it changed their life. It changed what they couldn't do when they were younger, and they had to, some of them came fresh out of high school. They didn't even know what they wanted to do when they were adults. So the time it was offered to them, and I'm sure many took it. We even had the GI insurance. We extended that. We had life insurance, and we had extended that for a while when my husband was still. Yeah, they did. They offered us many things. They were very kind. John and I kept in contact with a couple in Baltimore in the early years, but that's a long time. My husband's dead 26 years. And but we used to go, we'd go to the hospitals, the veterans' hospitals, you know, and talk to the men there and maybe bake cookies and take them and stuff like that. You had to keep up the morale. And there's nothing like having a young lady sit there and talk to you. The guys enjoyed that. We spent most of our time in Texas. It was a wonderful state. Of course, Colorado's taken its place right now. I'm in Colorado for 12 years. Let's see, how did I get out here? My daughter grew up in Brooklyn, attended Brooklyn College. Then she married and moved out to Long Island. Then she went to Post College out there. And then she belonged to a bicycle group. And they rode west. And they terminated one time in Colorado. And she met a young woman, a teacher. And she said, "Why don't you come here?" And she left there. I was left alone in Brooklyn. I was devastated. That's why I eventually had to come here myself. And she was very happy here, and she still is. She teaches in Thornton Middle School. I worked till I was 74, and I rode the subway. But New York at that time was a little rough, and I saw a stabbing on the subway. So that kind of scared me. So I came out and I said to my daughter, "Let's find a place to live." So I found this heavenly place called Broomfield. I love it. I'm so glad I'm here. I think it's the best in the country because they're friendly. People are always welcome. They treat them with dignity and respect, which I think most of them have earned. So this is a place to be. The employees here, I think the city does a good job in choosing the people who are employed here, because they're kind and they're considerate, most of them, and they do listen. Because most of us, all you want to have is someone to listen to you, and then maybe you feel better about your problem, because they can always give you a little extra lift, you know. I love it. You know, when you work all your life and you're retired, you owe something to the world. So let's go down where I find seniors just like myself. They've gone through the same times, we've had the same depression, so we can do things down here. This is my favorite, senior resources, because people are welcome here. Some of them make friends. They come here, they're alone. I feel sad when they've lost a spouse. This is the place to come. They can have lunch here with other people of their own age, talk over. We've lived in the same times. Many people I talked to never even imagined that they were in the war years. And when they told me, and I'm still so gratified at the letters that people wrote about me. I said, they got to be talking to us about some other guy. I haven't done that. And to get an award for something that you're happy doing, I love it. It gives me something to do, and I feel like I'm needed. And to be needed when you're 86, not bad. But God has been kind to me because I've met all good people. I don't know any that I don't like. So here I am, still going on. I have always been proud of the fact that our people, immigrants, came here to build this country. I don't think it should be torn down. I think it should continue to be built with the generation. And the young generation today, honey, you've got sailors, you've got people with the government. Hopefully, those that are trying to tear things down are in a minority. And hopefully we're strong enough to overcome that. My nephew is now a captain in the Navy in Newport. He's a young man, but these are the peace times. But there's a function. We have to be prepared. We always have to be prepared. You have many wonderful women in the Air Force, West Point, Annapolis. They're into it because there is a function for them. A man is, well, as I always say, you've got muscles where we haven't. So we can do some of the finer work to keep it moving. I always said my husband was, his family came from Italy. He was the first child of 6 children. He was the third born, but he was born in the United States. And he was so proud of it. Oh my Lord, he cried when he saluted the flag, and he was so proud of everything that he did. It was a wonderful thing because my husband and most of these young men, they were proud, and they were happy to be Americans. And they were just anxious to go. You know, it's good because you're bringing these things back to me that I've forgotten, because life goes on, and there are so many other things. I just wish war was a thing that was a thing of the past. I don't see why we need them. Why can't it be done peacefully? The loss of life, young men. A mother, we used to see gold stars in the window, and we knew they lost a son, a father, someone, you know. And even the boys that went into combat, they wouldn't know anything about killing another human being. My husband wouldn't. My husband wouldn't even go hunting. It must have been very difficult psychologically for these young people. It was very sad to lose young people. I lost, I used to teach Sunday school. And one boy, he was the greatest kid. He went in, he became a first lieutenant, and he stepped on a mine in their own field. And he was with another young man. He was a black boy, and he was an officer, and they were killed the same day. So those were the sad things, you know, for people that lost family. I was very fortunate. I didn't lose anybody in the family.